A jury in Paul Manafort's fraud trial will resume their deliberations on Monday. This comes as President Trump voiced support for his former campaign chairman, calling him a, quote, good person, a comment that is fueling speculation over whether the president could pardon Manafort to prevent him from cooperating with the Mueller probe. Manafort has been charged with 18 counts of tax and bank fraud. If convicted on all the charges, he faces more than 300 years in prison. For more on the trial, let's bring in Loyola Law School professor Jessica Levinson. Wow. OK, so the jury has been deliberating for 2 days now and will stretch into next week. They're still going to be talking. They asked a question that could be important. I want to get your opinion on it. They wanted the definition of reasonable doubt. They went to the judge and they said, could you please define this concept for us? The attorneys for Paul Manafort say this is good news. Is that your take as well?
That's my take as well. The prosecutors tend not to like questions from the jury, period. The prosecutors want the jury to have heard their story and to have said, you know what, that story makes sense. And it's not only likely that Paul Manafort committed these crimes of tax evasion and banking fraud, but he did it beyond a reasonable doubt. Whenever you have a jury come back and they have specific questions, particularly about the standard of proof for what you need to show in order to be guilty, prosecutors tend not to love that. And that's because trying to determine what the standard of proof is actually quite complicated. Your understanding of what beyond a reasonable doubt is may not be quite my understanding. And that's why in the trial, the defense attorneys came out and said, you know, here's a chart, and here is likely to have committed a crime. Here is highly likely to have committed a crime. Here is a high probability that you committed a crime. And then way over here on the other side, we have reasonable doubt. And that's how hard it is to get to reasonable doubt. Now, the prosecutor wants to say the reverse. And the prosecutor wants to say, look, this is not magic. We do this every day in every courtroom across America. And beyond a reasonable doubt just means you do not have rational doubts about it. And so one of the biggest things you fight for in a criminal trial is a good jury and understanding the burden of proof.
Now, on Friday, President Trump weighed in on the trial. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
I think the whole Manafort trial is very sad. When you look at what's going on there, I think it's a very sad day for our country. He worked for me for a very short period of time, but you know what? He happens to be a very good person. And I think it's very sad what they've done to Paul Manafort. Thank you very much.
Now, the president was also asked point blank if he'd pardon Manafort, and he said he didn't want to talk about that. I wonder, do you think the president is telegraphing a lifeline for Manafort by saying he's a good person and it's terrible what they've done to him?
Well, I think he's telegraphing a couple of things. One, it's important to remember that we do not have a sequestered jury in the Paul Manafort case. And so the jury has been instructed not to listen to the president, not to listen to other social media commentary. But it's very hard to ensure that that is absolutely the case. And so, one, the president has a number of audiences here, but one audience I think he hopes is the jury. And that's hugely problematic.
Wow.
And to use the president's word, that's sad.
Wow.
And I also would remind the president that being a nice guy does not mean that you have failed to commit a crime. So the other audience here absolutely could be Paul Manafort and telling him, you know, hold tight, stay strong, and I could pardon you. But it's really important for everyone to remember that the president has very broad pardoning power, but only over federal crimes. And Paul Manafort could also be facing state crimes. The New York State Attorney General is ready to go on state financial crimes. And so this is not a get-out-of-jail-free card for Paul Manafort.
Wow. You bring up a really good point. I didn't realize that that jury is not sequestered, and being told to ignore the president, ignore social media is like, you know, don't think of pink elephants.
Right.
I mean, to be honest, if Manafort is convicted, I'm curious, what do you think the impact might be on the wider Russia investigation?
Yeah, I think that this is something that everybody's looking to see. This is the first trial that Mueller has taken one of the players in this big investigation between the Trump campaign and the Russian government, and to try and see what this means for the Russia investigation. And I think it's really important for us to remember that it really means nothing. These are two separate cases. And I think psychologically, it's a huge win for Mueller if there's a guilty verdict. Psychologically, it's a huge win for the president. If there isn't, you have to believe that the president, who's been beating the drum of witch hunt for months now, is going to say, look, Mueller could not even prove his case with all this evidence to a jury. But what Robert Mueller did here is exactly what you are supposed to do in a big criminal investigation, which is you're looking at, was there any conspiracy between the Trump campaign and the Russian government? And then you start looking at all the players. And then sometimes you find that one of the players engaged in unrelated but problematic behavior. And then you create an entirely separate trial. And that's what we're seeing right now, that entirely separate trial. And so I think we all need to be really careful in not thinking that this means, oh, I guess President Trump did or did not collude with the Russian government. It really has no bearing on that.
An important point. Speaking of the president and possible ties to Russia, we're in a bit of a holding pattern at the moment regarding a possible Trump-Mueller interview. Rudy Giuliani, the president's TV lawyer, put it at 50-50. Let's say the president refuses an interview. What would Mueller have to consider before deciding whether to subpoena the president? What would Mueller be weighing in that decision?
Well, I think Mueller would be weighing whether he needs the president's live testimony. And when you're talking about whether or not there was a conspiracy between the Donald Trump campaign and the Russian government, it's pretty helpful to have testimony from Donald Trump. And so I know that Rudy Giuliani has been saying he has everything he needs. He doesn't have to hear from the president. That's not the way criminal investigations work. You have the right, if you think it is useful and necessary, to get testimony from the key players. And so I think, as a lawyer, what's going to be really fascinating to see is whether Robert Mueller pushes and says, no, I'm going to issue a subpoena, and that subpoena will be upheld in a court of law.
Jessica Levinson for us. Jessica, that was fascinating. I appreciate it. Please charge me by the hour.
Oh, I absolutely will not do that. But this was very fun. Thank you.
I appreciate it.